Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a topic that's as fascinating as it is important. Why is African American DNA so unique? This isn't just about ancestry or heritage, it's about understanding the incredible diversity, resilience, and stories hidden within our genes. DNA is more than just a biological blueprint, it's a living record of history, migration, survival, and transformation. When we talk about African American DNA, we're talking about one of the most complex and remarkable genetic stories on the planet. Here's the deal: African American DNA is unique because of its roots in Africa, the most genetically diverse continent on Earth. But that's just the beginning. The transatlantic slave trade, centuries of migration, and the blending of African, European, and even Native American ancestries have all shaped what we see today. It's a story of survival and adaptation, written into the genetic code of millions of African Americans. Why does this matter? For one, understanding this diversity helps researchers make breakthroughs in medicine, identify genetic markers, and address health disparities. But it's also about identity. Understanding where we come from helps us understand who we are today. In this video, we'll explore everything from the genetic richness of Africa to how history shaped African American DNA. We'll look at the scientific, cultural, and historical factors that make this topic so fascinating. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll see DNA in a whole new light. So, buckle up and get ready to explore one of the most incredible stories ever written, the story of African American DNA. And hey, before we dive in, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell. We've got a lot of exciting content coming your way, and you won't want to miss it. To understand the uniqueness of African American DNA, we have to start at the source, Africa. Often called the cradle of humanity, Africa is where modern humans first emerged more than 200,000 years ago. But here's what makes Africa truly remarkable: it's not just the birthplace of humanity, it's the most genetically diverse continent on the planet. Think of it like this: if you were to analyze the DNA of two people from different parts of Africa, you might find more genetic differences between them than you would between a European and an Asian person. That's how vast Africa's genetic diversity is. This diversity is the result of hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, environmental adaptations, and cultural practices. For African Americans, most ancestral roots trace back to West and Central Africa, regions home to a rich variety of ethnic groups, languages, and genetic traits. From the Yoruba and Igbo in Nigeria to the Akan in Ghana, these groups contributed to the rich genetic pool that African Americans inherit today. But African American DNA isn't just about African ancestry. It's a blend, a mosaic that also includes European and, in some cases, Native American genes. This blending happened over centuries, starting during the transatlantic slave trade when Africans were forcibly brought to the Americas. The result is a unique genetic profile that reflects both the diversity of Africa and the complexities of American history. Why is this diversity important? For one, it helps scientists understand human evolution. The genetic markers found in African American DNA often hold clues about how humans adapted to different environments, resisted diseases, and thrived under challenging conditions. For example, traits like resistance to malaria or adaptations to tropical climates are still present in African-descended populations. But it's not just about science, it's about identity. Understanding this diversity allows African Americans to connect with their heritage and appreciate the incredible richness of their ancestry. It's a reminder that DNA isn't just about biology, it's about history, culture, and resilience. No discussion of African American DNA would be complete without addressing the transatlantic slave trade. This dark chapter of history profoundly shaped African American genetics, leaving a legacy that's still evident today. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, millions of Africans were forcibly taken from their homelands and brought to the Americas. The journey, known as the Middle Passage, was brutal. Many didn't survive, and those who did often faced unimaginable hardships. But this wasn't just a human tragedy, it also created what scientists call a genetic bottleneck. Let me explain. A genetic bottleneck happens when a large population is reduced to a smaller group, limiting genetic diversity. Imagine pouring a jar of marbles through a small funnel. Only a fraction makes it through, and the rest is lost. That's what happened during the transatlantic slave trade. The genetic diversity of millions of Africans was filtered through the traumatic experience of slavery, leaving a smaller pool of genes that would shape future generations. But even within this tragedy, there's a story of resilience. Enslaved Africans brought with them not just their genes, but also their cultures, languages, and traditions. Over time, these elements blended with those of European colonizers and Native Americans, creating a unique genetic and cultural identity. For example, DNA testing often reveals that African Americans have about 70 to 80% African ancestry, with the remaining percentage coming from European and Native American sources. This admixture wasn't always consensual. Enslavement often involved exploitation and violence, but it left a lasting imprint on African American DNA. Today, this complex ancestry is a source of both scientific interest and personal discovery. Genetic testing companies like 23andMe or Ancestry DNA often highlight the diverse roots of African Americans, tracing connections to specific regions in Africa and beyond. For many, this process is a way to reclaim a history that was forcibly taken. The transatlantic slave trade was a tragedy of unimaginable scale, but the genetic legacy it left behind is a testament to human resilience. It's a reminder that even in the face of oppression, the human spirit and the human genome can endure. African American DNA is not just unique because of its African roots or historical mixing, it's also incredibly diverse within the population itself. This diversity reflects centuries of movement, adaptation, and intermixing, creating a genetic profile unlike any other. Let's break it down. African Americans don't trace their lineage to a single part of Africa. Instead, their ancestry spans multiple regions, primarily West and Central Africa. Groups like the Yoruba in Nigeria, the Akan in Ghana, and the Congo peoples in Angola all contributed to the genetic makeup of African Americans. Each of these groups has its own unique genetic markers, reflecting the incredible diversity of Africa itself. When enslaved Africans were brought to the Americas, they carried this diversity with them. But the story doesn't end there. Over the centuries, African Americans moved across the United States, mixing with other populations and with one another. The Great Migration, for example, saw millions of African Americans leave the rural South for cities in the North, Midwest, and West during the 20th century. These movements brought people from different regions and backgrounds together, creating a melting pot of genetic variation. Then there's the issue of admixture. Many African Americans have European ancestry, which often accounts for about 20% of their genetic makeup, though this can vary widely from person to person. This European admixture typically comes from the colonial and antebellum periods, when power dynamics often resulted in non-consensual relationships. In some cases, there's also evidence of Native American ancestry, adding another layer of complexity to African American genetics. Why does this matter? For one, it challenges the idea that race is a clear-cut biological concept. The genetic diversity within the African American population is so vast that it defies simple categorization. Scientists often emphasize that while race is a social construct, genetic variation is real, and African American DNA highlights just how complex and interconnected humans are. This diversity also has practical implications for health. For example, African Americans have contributed to groundbreaking genetic research, helping scientists identify markers for conditions like sickle cell anemia, hypertension, and diabetes. But the diversity within this population also means that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to medicine. Personalized healthcare becomes essential when dealing with such a rich and varied genetic background. In short, African American DNA isn't just a blend of African, European, and Native American genes, it's a dynamic, living testament to the resilience and adaptability of a people. One of the most fascinating aspects of African American DNA is how it reflects the survival strategies of our ancestors. Over millennia, humans adapted to their environments, and those adaptations are encoded in our genes. For African-descended populations, some of these genetic traits were key to surviving the harsh conditions of tropical Africa, and they still exist in African American DNA today. Let's start with one of the most well-known examples, the sickle cell gene. This gene evolved as a defense against malaria, a disease that was, and still is, common in sub-Saharan Africa. People who inherit one copy of the sickle cell gene are more resistant to malaria, giving them a survival advantage in regions where the disease is widespread. However, inheriting two copies of the gene leads to sickle cell anemia, a painful and often debilitating condition. This is a prime example of how a genetic trait that evolved for survival can have both benefits and risks. But sickle cell isn't the only genetic marker that tells a story of survival. For instance, certain genes in African-descended populations are linked to faster responses to infections, which may have evolved in response to the high disease burden in tropical environments. These adaptations were crucial for survival in Africa but can pose challenges in different environments. Take hypertension, for example. African Americans are more likely to suffer from high blood pressure than other groups, and while lifestyle factors like diet and stress play a role, genetics may also be a factor. Some researchers believe that the salt retention genes that helped African ancestors survive in hot, arid climates might contribute to higher rates of hypertension today. It's also important to note that African American DNA has been instrumental in advancing genetic research. By studying genetic markers in African-descended populations, scientists have identified variations that can help predict disease risk and response to treatments. For example, African American participants in genome-wide association studies have helped uncover genetic factors for conditions like diabetes, heart disease, and certain cancers. However, there's still a lot we don't know. African Americans, and Africans in general, are underrepresented in genetic studies. This lack of representation means that many genetic discoveries and medical treatments are based on data from European populations, which may not always apply to African Americans. Increasing diversity in genetic research is crucial for ensuring that everyone benefits from medical advancements. In the end, African American DNA isn't just a record of where we've been, it's a guide for where we're going, especially when it comes to improving health outcomes for all. The unique genetic diversity of African Americans has become a cornerstone for advancing genetic research and understanding human biology. African American DNA holds invaluable insights into how humans adapt to different environments, how diseases develop, and how treatments can be tailored to diverse populations. Despite their contributions, African Americans remain underrepresented in genetic studies, a gap that needs to be addressed to ensure equitable scientific progress. One of the most significant contributions from African-descended populations is the study of genetic variations that influence disease resistance. For example, sickle cell research has not only deepened our understanding of malaria resistance but also paved the way for therapies targeting genetic blood disorders. Similarly, studies involving African American participants have helped identify genetic markers related to conditions like heart disease and type 2 diabetes, which disproportionately affect African American communities. Another area where African American DNA has been instrumental is cancer research. African Americans have been central to studies on prostate cancer, which affects this group at higher rates than other populations. Researchers have identified genetic variants that increase risk, allowing for better screening and potential early interventions. Likewise, African American participation in breast cancer studies has revealed unique genetic mutations, such as BRCA1 and BRCA2, helping scientists understand how these genes function across different populations. But it's not just about disease. African American DNA has also contributed to our understanding of human evolution. By studying African-descended populations, researchers have gained insights into ancient migration patterns, how humans adapted to various climates, and the genetic basis of traits like skin color, height, and metabolic efficiency. For example, the discovery of diverse genetic markers in African Americans has shed light on how genes influence responses to diet, exercise, and medication. Despite these advancements, African Americans are still underrepresented in genetic research. Historically, mistrust stemming from unethical practices, such as the Tuskegee syphilis study, has led to low participation in medical studies. This mistrust is understandable but creates challenges for scientists trying to develop inclusive medical solutions. To bridge this gap, many researchers and organizations are now prioritizing diversity in genetic studies. Initiatives like the All of Us research program aim to collect data from underrepresented groups, ensuring that future medical treatments are effective for everyone. African American DNA has already made significant contributions to science, but its full potential can only be realized with greater inclusion and representation. While the genetic diversity of African Americans is rooted in biology, it has also been deeply influenced by cultural practices and migration patterns. African American DNA is a living record of not just ancestry but also the ways in which culture, environment, and history have shaped identity over generations. Let's start with the cultural influences brought from Africa. Enslaved Africans didn't just carry their genes, they carried their traditions, languages, and ways of life. These cultural practices often influenced survival and adaptation in the Americas. For example, dietary habits brought from Africa, such as the use of leafy greens, yams, and okra, have persisted in African American cuisine. Interestingly, some of these foods align with genetic predispositions, such as a tolerance for certain types of starches or fats. Migration within the United States has also played a significant role in shaping African American genetics. The Great Migration, which began in the early 20th century, saw millions of African Americans move from the rural South to urban areas in the North, Midwest, and West. This massive movement brought together people from diverse African and European ancestries, resulting in more genetic mixing. For example, someone whose ancestors were primarily West African may also carry genetic markers from the Gullah people of the Carolinas or the Creoles of Louisiana. Intermarriage and cultural blending further added complexity to African American DNA. In areas like New Orleans, African Americans often intermarried with French, Spanish, and Native American populations, creating unique genetic profiles. Similarly, in northern cities like Chicago and New York, African Americans living in multicultural environments contributed to and benefited from the genetic and cultural exchange. Beyond migration, cultural resilience has also shaped DNA through practices like traditional medicine and spiritual healing. For example, the use of herbal remedies, which originated in Africa, persisted in African American communities and may have influenced genetic adaptations to certain plants or compounds. But culture isn't just about the past, it's also about the future. Today, African Americans are using tools like DNA testing to reconnect with their roots, exploring their genetic ties to specific African regions. These discoveries often inspire a renewed sense of pride and identity, bridging the gap between the past and present. Ultimately, African American DNA is as much a cultural legacy as it is a genetic one. It reflects not just where people came from, but how they've survived, adapted, and thrived in the face of change. Representation in genetic research isn't just important, it's essential. Without diverse populations and studies, scientific advancements and medical breakthroughs can end up benefiting only a select few, leaving others behind. When it comes to African Americans, the lack of representation in DNA studies has serious consequences for both science and public health. Here's the issue: most genetic research has historically focused on populations of European descent. This bias means that many genetic markers and medical treatments are tailored to European populations, often missing key variations found in African American DNA. For example, African Americans are more likely to develop certain conditions, like sickle cell anemia, hypertension, and kidney disease, but they're often excluded from studies that could help identify genetic risk factors or develop tailored treatments. Why does this happen? Part of the problem is historical mistrust. The unethical treatment of African Americans in studies like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment created a legacy of skepticism toward medical research. Many African Americans are understandably cautious about participating in genetic studies, fearing exploitation or misuse of their data. But the cost of this mistrust is high. Without African American representation, researchers miss out on understanding the full spectrum of human genetic diversity. This gap affects everything from disease prevention to drug development. For example, medications like statins, used to treat high cholesterol, may not be as effective in African Americans because they were developed based on European genetic data. To address this, researchers and organizations are working to rebuild trust and increase diversity in studies. Initiatives like the African Ancestry Genome Project and All of Us aim to collect data from underrepresented groups, ensuring that future medical advancements are inclusive. These efforts are critical not just for African Americans, but for global health, as understanding African American DNA can lead to breakthroughs that benefit everyone. Representation isn't just about fairness, it's about progress. When African Americans are included in genetic research, we all gain a deeper understanding of our shared humanity. It's a reminder that diversity isn't just something to celebrate, it's something to study, understand, and learn from.